we're good. Okay, you guys will get that little pop-up that says we're streaming this live. And let me get this screen share up and we're gonna get rolling. Okay, so a couple things I wanted to do before we got kind of into today's materials. Do a little bit of review of what we did last week, but more so where this material is and how we're presenting it. I think we're pretty close to ultimately how I want this to be delivered to you guys in the future and how you'll be able to reference it after the fact, but we're going to probably make a couple of changes. So a couple things, if you guys look in the chat, I copied a link to the actual course materials. They are different than what you looked at last week. When I say different, they've just been supplemented. So you can either copy the link in chat and you'll have the most current PDF version of the course materials. Or if you do download the presentation that we have in front of you, you can click on what I'm going to click on right now. And it will look remarkably similar to what we had before. No, by the way, nobody told me I had a typo in my title. So anyway, we fixed the typo for those of you that know we spelled versions with a Z. Last I checked, we don't spell versions with a Z. So if you go through this, basically, you'll just see that we've added a kind of a page break for section 1, the residential listing agreement. And we added a page break. That's the first time I've seen this. So hopefully Austin did what I asked him to do, which he normally does. And oops, come on, where's my screen at? And we added a page break for section 2. So if you are actually printing out the PDF and you want to take a look at it, today we're on section 2, the RPA, and we're going to go through the RPA packet. Next week, we'll of course have section 3, and then we'll probably start getting into other stuff, whatever it happens to be. By the way, let me take that back. This week, we're going to finish section 1, which is the RLA. Next week, we will jump into section 2, which will be the RPA. So section 2, section 1 doesn't necessarily mean day 1, day 2. So anyway, so we're going to modify this course material as we go. So if you want to print a PDF copy, there it is, just sitting there waiting for you to grab it. The other thing I wanted to share with you, I'm not sure this is exactly how I want it to look. It's close, but not exactly. If you guys go to our new portal that we're building, I think I have it up here somewhere. I do. So this is the website that John Menke is helping us build at the company. And this is an area where I want you guys to be able to come to find all things Coldwell Banker Town and Country. So what we're going to be doing from this point forward is we're going to basically be publishing all of the video training materials that we do, the stuff that we've done in the past, but you know, the stuff that we're doing currently. This is not a finished product, but it's close. So if I scroll down and I go to curated training down here in the lower right, we click into that. This isn't in the order I want it to be right now, but if you scroll down a little bit, you will find contracts and disclosures. Okay. And you'll see Contract College 2023 session 1. This is the class that we did last week. You click into that and basically it queues up a YouTube video, which basically goes through, actually, it's not really a YouTube video, but it is a YouTube video. Basically, it is the live lecture class that we did last week. We need to clean the video up a little bit. If I click into this,
those other 11 offers. Oh,
you
wait a
can see
minute.
that I kind of skipped ahead, but the front of the video has got some garbage in it. It's kind of got the, like the beginning of the video. We're sitting here talking to each other. So I'm going to have Austin clean that up. But basically what we're trying to accomplish here is we will have all of these videos on the portal. So you'll have session 1, session 2, et cetera, et cetera. And then below that, we'll actually have the material. I don't really like the way this material is rendering. But if you're like, man, I didn't get the PDFs or I didn't see the link or the link wasn't working for me, you'll be able to come back here, rewatch the video that we did and get the associated material that goes with it. So this is the plan. It's not exactly rendering the way I want, but it's getting close. So I just wanted to go through that real quick in the beginning and share with you kind of what our goal is and what we're looking for. So before I jump in, we're going to do the same thing we did last time. We'll run till 1:30, give or take a few minutes. Anybody have any questions? Manford Edens, you are unmuted. Did you have a question or you just got an open mic? Looks like you had an open mic. So, okay. I don't see anybody unmuted. So I'm just going to jump in and we're going to go from here. So what I didn't do is queue our presentation up to where we need to be. So I got to, actually, let me do this. It'll be a little bit faster. let me go to where we're starting off today. The presentation material, by the way, is exactly the same as it was before. I can't remember if I had this slide up when we finished last week's training. I don't think that we did. So I do want you guys to survey the course. So please, click on this survey. I'll show you guys how to get to the survey and all the rest of that. I can put it in the chat and tell me what we did well, tell me what we didn't do so well, what you need to be improved. So, okay, so we're going to jump in. I'm not going to necessarily be monitoring the chat. So, just unmute yourself and start talking if you have a question. So we're finishing up the residential listing agreement package. We left off last week on literally, let's get to page 1 of the actual residential listing. So here we are. So I'm going to jump in. So a couple things. Start off right from the beginning. This form was not revised in December. This form was last revision was last summer in June. So most of you that have taken a listing have already familiar with the form. There is no brand new forms or brand new changes to point out between June and the December revision. So date prepared, let's start with the basics. Date prepared is exactly what it says. Date prepared is the date that you actually drafted the contract. The date you drafted the contract does not necessarily mean that the date that the contract was signed by your seller. Okay, so they can be different. In most cases, I think you're probably, I don't know if it's in most cases, it could be 50-50, who knows. I prepare the agreement, I meet with the client, they don't sign it that day. I leave it with them, they sign it 2 days later, 3 days later, whatever it happens to be. Or I email it to them, whatever it happens to be. So just know that there's no direct correlation with the date you prepared with the date that the contract starts. The date the contract starts is when the date the contract is executed by your seller. All right. So there are multiple different types of listings, guys. We haven't really talked much about this. Well, I guess now would be the time to do it. The listing that I'm going to review in this class is going to be the exclusive right to sell listing. Okay. The RLA. There are other types. Probably not even going to address them in this class because the reality is it's the likelihood of you taking an open listing or an agency listing is probably slim to none. They do have various meanings and different purposes, but let me just give you the basics why we're going to go through an exclusive right. The exclusive right to exclusive authorization and right to sell basically means that the seller of the property is listing with you, agreeing to pay you a commission and nobody else. Okay. Meaning, and if you're brand new in this business, you may not even be aware of this. There are types of listings where a seller can list with Global Banker, it can list with Remax, it can list with Berkshire Hathaway, it can list with all 3 companies at the same time. In theory, you could see 3 different real estate signs in the yard, and basically the first person who brings them a buyer wins. For obvious reasons, that is not a business practice that's adopted in our market. And however, if you are scrolling through zip forms, you'll find the different listings. You'll find an open listing, you'll find an agency listing. So do not use those. You only want to use the exclusive authorization and right to sell. And that basically is exactly what it says. And the word exclusive authorization is really what we're looking for. You are the exclusive agent on that. Okay, your seller is going to go here. So again, you'll have your client's name. We'll have an entity, if they are a trust or a corporation or whatever the legal name of the seller is, that goes here. So if it's John A. Smith, great. If it's John and Sally Smith, great. If it's the Smith Trust dated November 10th, that's what goes there. So it's not absolutely critical that the name of the seller is 100% perfect match with the seller that's on title, but it certainly is best practice. Okay. So what I mean by that is if I'm the seller and my name is Lance Martin and you put in Lance Martin and I sign, I have a valid listing agreement. Okay. But if you then subsequently go to title and it says that I hold title as Lance E. Martin, my middle initial is in there, but you didn't put the middle initial on the actual listing agreement, don't panic. It's still valid. Okay. I don't want to use terms like it's close enough, but it represents the seller. But if the title is held by Lance E. Martin, it's better to use Lance E. Martin. So, best practice number one, I suppose, is pull title before, go to Realist Tax, get it from the title, get it from whatever source, we're gathering our title information from, and make sure you actually know who the seller is. Include their full middle name if that's what it says. Use the middle initials, junior, senior, the third, the name of the trust, the whole 9 yards, get it in there correctly. Now, there is a little bit of an exception to this, not best practice, but I've done this many, many times, and you may find yourself doing it many, many times as well. Let's suppose that the property is owned by John and Sally Smith, all right? But for whatever reason, John Smith is not available to sign the listing agreement, okay? The husband is out of the country, he's unavailable, whatever it happens to be, and you're only dealing with the wife, Sally Smith.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yep, go for it, jump in.
On that name, when it's the trust, if they need to include the date, right? The date created the trust.
Well, potentially, the short answer is probably yes. I know that's not a definite yes. So this is the answer to that question, Dwayne, is when and a great question, by the way. So everybody in here at some point in time is going to be listing a house that's held in a trust. All right. There is a page in the trust, which is normally can be called a variety of different things, but in most cases, it's called like a certification of trust or a trust certificate. Normally it's 1 page or it's 2 pages. And, trusts can be hundreds of pages. All right. So you want to get a hold of either the front page of the trust, the entire trust, or at least the page that says this is the certificate of trust. You're going to need that for a bunch of reasons. One of them being it will have the legal name of the trust. All right. So if the legal name of the trust is the Martin Trust, then that's what goes in here. What you will find, like on my trust, for example, the legal name of my trust is the Martin Trust, dated whatever it is, November 20th, 2005. So, so whatever the legal name is what goes here. All right. And this is an area, to Dwayne's point, and it's a great question because this is kind of I don't want to say it's a mistake, but it's very common for people to get a little loose, or maybe even the people who are responsible for the trust, they may not even remember the name of the trust. Like, for example, the name of my trust is the Martin Trust, dated something. I don't remember what that date is, guys. So if I'm sitting down with you and you're asking me, I might just say, oh, it's the Martin Trust. Or it's dated December of 2005. So in that case, best practice is, okay, Lance, let's take a couple minutes, go get a copy of the trust and let's get the proper name in here. But again, I don't want to encourage you to be sloppy. But if, for example, it's the Martin Trust and you don't put the date in there, in my opinion, you still have a valid listing. All right. So as long as you have an intent and the seller they want to sell this property. Let's get back to my example of, John and Sally Smith, and John Smith is out of the area and Sally Smith wants to list it. You have title in front of you. It says John and Sally Smith, husband and wife, as joint tenants. They own this house. Okay. John's not available. Sally says, hey, I've spoken with John. We're on the same page. Everything is cool. We want to list the house. You can take this listing. It is a valid listing with Sally's signature and Sally's name alone. Okay. Now, before you do that, you had better make sure, number one, that you believe Sally. Sally's being completely transparent with you, and Sally's not playing games, because it does not take everybody on title to list a property, but it does take everybody on title to sell a property. So if Sally's playing games and trying to sell the property while her husband's out of the country, and now we get an offer 2 days later, and now we get a hold of John and say, hey, John, we're ready to roll and we're good to go. And he's like, what are you talking about? I mean, what do you mean you're talking about? Sally said she's been in touch with you and we listed a house for sale last week and I have an offer. If all parties are not on board, that house isn't selling. All right. So be careful when you are listed. I've done it many, many times. And I don't know that I've had many horror stories with this, because quite honestly, when I do list a property and I don't have everybody signing, I'm pretty good about making sure that the people who haven't signed it, there's at least been some sort of communication. Okay. And then ideally I try to get their signature later. So, and again, do I do exactly what Dwayne did? As I'm not necessarily looking at who's unmuted, or I'm not looking at chat. So just jump in and interrupt if you've got a question there. So, okay, so our seller is going to go here, entity, seller, whatever it happens to be. This is, of course, going to be Coldwell Banker Town and Country. Your name does not go here. The company name goes in this particular section. The beginning date is the date that you believe you're going to start the listing. So let's get back to date prepared. So today's January 12th. I'm preparing it January 12th. If I believe the seller is actually going to sign this on January 12th, then the beginning date will be January 12th. All right. Now, if we've had discussions and they're like, hey, send this to me, but we really don't want to get started until February 1, that's fine. Go ahead and drop in February 1. So put in whatever your beginning date is. Well, let's suppose we do January 12th and we do January 12th here, but let's suppose for whatever reason, the seller doesn't actually execute this document till February 1st. Okay. That's okay. You don't have to go back and change this date. You can leave it as January 12th. They will sign it on February 1st. The listing itself, of course, won't become active until it's executed. And the real effective beginning date would be February 1st. But don't get hung up on changing this date if it doesn't get signed on the exact day. It's fairly common to have these things take a day or two and get delayed. The end date, we've talked about this a few times in recent training. So, very old school of thought would be, hey, you take a listing for a minimum of 3 months, 6 months, whatever it happens to be. Everybody's kind of got different opinions on that. When I first got in the business, average days on market from time you took a listing to the time you got an offer could very easily be 2 or 3 months. An escrow would fall out, you'd start over, you got another 2 or 3 months. So the standard of practice was, we're going to take a 6-month listing. So whatever you put in here, and I'm going to kind of segue out of contract college and into salesmanship here just a tad. Whatever you put in here, just be prepared to give a reasonable explanation. Okay. This is why I take 6-month listings. This is why I take, and this is what's going to be. Is what's going to be the amount of effort, the amount of time, the amount of money, blah, 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 whatever it happens to be. Now, for me, and some of you have heard me say this in different trainings, Drew and I, for many, many years, have basically put in December 31st, 2023. We will just put in the last day of the year. So if we were listing this today on January 12th, we, in effect, would be taking an 11.5-month listing. Many sellers will kind of raise an eyebrow on that. So what does this mean? I'm signed. You're not going to sell my house in a month. Why does this thing go for 11.5 months? And our explanation to that is simple. We put it in the system for that period of time, quite honestly, because we put every listing in the system for that period of time. Every listing we have expires on the same day. And frankly, it's more of an internal mechanism for Drew and I, so that we don't, in effect, forget an expiration date, or which that might come across. What do you mean you're going to forget an expiration date? Well, yeah, so we don't forget an expiration date. But this is the deal, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. When we get down to another page on here, we are going to give you the ability to cancel the listing at any time without penalty or cost. So I've been doing that for, I don't know, probably close to 30 years or longer. I probably have had, I don't know, maybe 5 listings cancel. And quite honestly, exercising that clause, or maybe it's 10, I don't know. It's not a large number though. And the reality was those people would have canceled anyway. If I didn't let them out, it would have been a heartburn, headache, a battle, a fight. And I don't want to do business with people who don't want to do business with me. So it's a very easy thing for us to sit back and say, hey, we're going to give this extend. And this is the flip side of this real quick, in case I forget. If we listed the property on November 1st of 2023, we still would have the expiration date on December 31st of 2023. So in that case, okay, wait, we went from an 11.5-month listing to a 2-month listing. Yes, what I said, I meant all of our listings expire on the last day of the year every year. And that whatever Drew and Drake and I have outstanding and pending the last month of December, then we go to that client and say, hey, guess what? We're going to need more time. And guess what that more time means? December 31st, 2024. So we're going to extend it out for a whole nother year. It's in the system. We don't have to worry about it. And the same language applies. If you're not happy with us, you can cancel the agreement at any particular time. You don't have to worry about us giving you any heartburn. Andy?
I have a question, Lance.
Oh, Irene, go ahead. What you got?
Lance, I was gonna jump in earlier, but regarding doing a listing, and I'm probably gonna have hopefully a listing coming soon, and it's due to a divorce for equalization.
Okay.
One party wants to and needs to sell it in order to pay off the equalization for the other half. Is there any type of document that I would need to do the listing, even though the seller, the seller is on title as sole and separate property and was signed off by the spouse?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so let me make sure I understand what you're doing. You husband and wife are getting a divorce. There's a court order. I love the word equalization. There's a court order that says this house has to be liquidated to equalize the estate. So, and by the way, that doesn't always mean 50-50, but let's just for argument's sake, say there's, $500,000 in equity and half of it goes to the husband, half of it goes to the wife. We sell it, we equalize it. Court says it has to be done. Even if let's suppose the wife is the only one on title, Sally Smith, sole and separate property. Okay. But the court said this has to be sold. Maybe Sally really doesn't want to sell it, but hey, court says you got to sell it. Then Sally's going to sell it. There's going to be documentation. I would probably, if there truly is a court order, I probably would reference that court order in the listing agreement. Say this listing is subject to, court.
Well, yeah, Lance, the thing is that the situation, she has to sell it in order to give him a portion of the money. So she's requesting to tell the courts that the only way for her to give him the portion he's requesting is to sell the house. That's the story. So we're just waiting for her to present it to the other side so they can agree to it.
Okay, well, a little bit of digital static there, Irene. So but I think I got the gist of the question. So the court has said, hey, these are the assets. You're supposed to get X. You're supposed to get Y. The only way for the wife, if I heard you correctly, in order for her to satisfy the court order, she doesn't have the money in the bank, so she has to sell the house. Is that what's basically happening?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Good. So I understood. So this is the deal. It's a normal listing. You're just listing the house. Now the reason for listing of the house may or may not be relevant in this case, as long as she's willingly listing the house, which it sounds like she is. The fact that it's subject to a court order to settle the divorce case, frankly, isn't really relevant. She's selling the house. So what would end up happening in that case is you would just list it, under the circumstances you've given me, no special forms, just a regular residential listing agreement. You list it. What would be potentially special, which has really nothing to do with the listing agreement, is when you open up escrow, there's going to be an escrow instruction that the wife will sign, and the wife will sign that escrow instruction that says this dollar amount is to be distributed to this individual. So depending upon what the instructions are from the court, maybe she can just sell it and she can just, write him a check. Maybe it needs to be dispersed because of escrow. Maybe it needs to go into an attorney's trust account first. I don't know. So, but as far as the listing agreement is concerned, as long as the wife sole and separate property is not fighting the issue, it's fine. Now, if she's fighting it, that's a whole different story. If she's like, screw that, I ain't doing this, I don't care what the judge says. Well, she needs to get legal counsel, and this is something that you need to be very careful with. But if she's voluntarily selling it as part of a divorce, then you're good. Andy, you've been unmuted for a minute. I'm assuming you wanted to jump in, or are you just open mic?
Hey, Lance, it's Isela. I'm here sitting with Andy. I had a question for the seller. If it's multiple sellers on the first line, do we just include all the sellers on the first line, or does it give you an option to put in a second name?
Yeah, you have an option to put in a second name, and if you need more people, there's going to be an additional signature addendum that you're going to drop in. This is one of those things that's always challenging. For the longest time, if you had more than 2 sellers, it was a pain in the rear. I'm not going to pull up zip forms, but if you guys go to zip forms, you've got seller 1 and you've got seller 2. There really isn't an option for, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, because I don't write these contracts every day, at least in zip forms. So if you've got that 3rd or 4th seller, you're going to be using an additional signature addendum. So it can get a little messy, it can definitely get a little messy on these. And for those of you that are super OCD, when it comes to that, sometimes these contracts do get a little bit messy. So, but bottom line is, on a listing, ideally list all of the sellers, one of them, two of them, five of them, whatever it is. At least one of them sign, all right? Contracts, all five get listed, all five sign. Dan Speaker had a transaction. I don't know, a couple years ago, and if I'm not mistaken, there was, I think, 7 or 8 sellers, all brothers and sisters, all scattered all over the country in different states. The contract was valid and legitimate, but man, it was a mess. It was just, they had little initials here and signatures there, and it was a mess. So everybody signs. Everybody signs. Okay. So I'm going to press on. So we've made it to line 3. Okay. So the contract starts on this date. It ends again. It doesn't have to be December 31st. I'm just giving you guys something to think about. That is referred to as the listing period. By the way, every listing has to have an end date. Okay. These dates cannot be blank. It has to start and stop. If the contract is invalid, if you don't want to put a date in here. This is an exclusive, irrevocable right to sell. What does that mean? It's exclusive to you, irrevocable. They can't just unilaterally cancel it unless you put that language in there, which I've suggested you can put in there, which basically pretty much changes this. This does give them a revocable right to cancel the listing at any time without any cost. But the default language in the contract says the seller cannot just cancel the property. This also gives us the right to exchange the property. What they're referring to in exchange is basically a 1031 exchange. Okay. It could in theory be a trade of some sort, but any transfer of title is what this listing agreement is addressing. Property address, 123 Main Street, situated in any town, USA, any county, USA, zip code accordingly. Don't be lazy, get all this information. I mean, this was kind of a sample, but put the county in, put the city, put the state, grab the assessor's parcel number. Make sure the assessor's parcel numbers match. I have all, by the way, Andy, I read your survey the other day and I appreciate that you like some of my stories. It makes it a little bit more interesting. I have to be a little careful because I have more stories than content here. So, I could stay on this page for the next 90 minutes and never even make it to the next paragraph and just tell you a whole bunch of stories here. But real story, we had an agent in our office, this was probably 15 years ago, that basically sold a house, opened escrow, was 2 days away from close of escrow, and was meeting the buyer at the property to do the final walkthrough. The agent is waiting in front of the property and waiting in front of the property, and the buyer's late, and the buyer's late. He's like, geez, where's up with the buyer? What's going on here? Our agent looks down the street, 5, 6, 8 houses down on the other side of the street, sees his client parked in front of a different house. In front of the house that had the Tarbell Realtor sign in front of it. And he says, what's going on? Goes down the street and says, what are you doing? And they're like, what are you doing? You're late. Like, no, I'm not late. I've been down over there waiting for you to do the final walkthrough. They wrote offers on the wrong house. Okay. So what ended, they showed both of those houses. They got done. The agent thought they wanted to buy house number 1 on Main Street. The buyer said, wait, no, we actually wanted house number 7 on Main Street. They went through the entire transaction. Property was inspected, property was appraised, everything was done. Nobody realized that they were looking at the wrong house. Okay. Thank God we caught that prior to close of escrow. You can only, by the way, another good reason to do a final walkthrough. Only imagine the nightmare that would have been had we closed that escrow and then we had discovered that the buyer actually bought the house across the street. So all these little details, they sound like just that. They just sound like little details, but they are important. I'm looking at chat. Yeah, what a disaster. No doubt, Jennifer. It was almost a disaster. Okay, so we've got our information here. If the property is a manufactured home, you're going to check this box. It's going to populate the manufactured home listing addendum or agreement. We will go through that at a later date. If the property is part of a probate, conservatorship, guardianship, or receivership, then we're going to use the probate listing addendum and advisory. Only check these boxes if those apply. All right. We used to have different listing agreements for a probate and a different listing agreement for a manufactured home. We no longer have different listing agreements. We use this listing agreement for all of them, and then we check the box for the appropriate addendum. Okay, page 1 is in the books. I'm Again, I'm not really looking at chat, so I'll just periodically look in there. So if you type something in chat that's specific to what we're looking at and I don't look at it right away, just unmute yourself, please, and scream at me. Okay, listing price and terms. So this, here it goes, you know, I'm gonna list this for $895,000. You'll write it out here. It's very simple when you go into Zip Forms. You basically type the number in 899 and it will write out the words 899. Pretty simple, straightforward stuff. Listing terms. Most of the time you guys are leaving this blank. I would say there's nothing wrong with leaving it blank, but if there is something special to this listing, and I would recommend you avoid putting special terms in here. But if there is something special, this is where you would put it. For example, as is cash only. You know for sure that there's no way in the world this property is going to be able to finance, and the only way it's going to sell is cash. Fine, you can go ahead and put cash in here. Or if you're like, hey, this is subject to the seller successfully purchasing a replacement property as part of a 1031 exchange, fine, go ahead and put that language in here. Short of that, let's not be creative and try to put things in here. There's really no need to be creative. So generally speaking, this is going to be blank. But again, it's possible that you could have the type of examples that I just gave you. Okay, so now we get to the compensation. And at the end of the day, the listing agreement in effect does two things. It basically gives you the authorization to solicit offers, and ultimately it locks in how much you're going to get paid to do that. So in effect, the whole bottom of the rest of page 1 talks about how we get paid. It amazes me, people that have been in the business for a long time have sometimes no understanding of how they actually get paid. So I'm going to take a little bit and go through this just so you guys understand, you know, this is how you get paid. This is important. Okay. So the first thing you have in here in big, bold black letters, in effect, is telling the consumer that real estate commissions are not fixed and they're negotiable between the buyer and the seller. So you guys need to be very careful with implying at all that, you know, a standard commission is 6%, or the required commission is 6%. You're not technically allowed to use those words. For example, standard. If you say the standard commission is 6%, that implies that Coldwell Banker 6%, RE/MAX is 6%, everybody in the industry is 6%. You can get into some collusion and some price fixing accusations after that. So stay away from these words. So what I generally will do is I'll explain to the client that, hey, I'll read them the thing. Hey, just so you know, commissions are negotiable. We might charge different than another company, and maybe you've had other companies out. This is my fee. And then I'll justify my fee with my value proposition. So once you get past the disclosure, the seller agrees to pay the broker compensation for services as follows. You have basically a couple different options here. You can do the percentage. So let's use my example, 6%. Just for some clarity here real quick, guys. This just came up a couple months ago. We are on a class with Coldwell Banker, Town and Country. Okay. We are allowed to talk commissions here because we're all with Coldwell Banker, Town and Country. If we were doing contract college and we had other people from other associations with IVAR, other people in here, you would not hear me say 6%, 5% to you. You wouldn't hear me say anything. That gets back to kind of this, this transparency. We don't ever want to be accused of colluding with other companies, real or perceived. But when I say a percentage in here, just know that we are allowed to discuss that within the Coldwell Banker brokerage family, just not outside of that. So at any rate, so we're going to take a 6% commission. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. If I don't do a 6%, you might want to do a flat fee. You would check this box and you would type in, $22,000, whatever that happens to be. So they're agreeing to pay 6%. Now this is, let me go back a sentence, 6% of the list price. So we're listed for $850. So right now, contractually, they understand they're going to pay 6% of the list price, or if the purchase price is entered into of that purchase price. So if the purchase price is negotiated down, okay, they agree to sell it for, what did I say a minute ago? $850? No, they're going to sell it for $830. Okay, well now it's 6% of $830. But what if we got multiple offers? The property gets bid up, okay, gets bid up to $900,000. Now it's 6% of $900,000. Okay, so it's either the list price or whatever the actual negotiated price is. Generally speaking, and this happens periodically, I don't know if I can really remember the last time it happened to me. It has happened to me, but if you negotiate the price down, The commission, of course, comes down. Generally speaking, sellers don't ever mention it and they're kind of happy for it. Occasionally, if you get the property bid up and they bid it up 50 grand above, you might have a seller says, well, wait a minute, I was really only planning on paying a commission based on 850. I'm not interested in paying a commission on 900. So you will have those discussions. So periodically, most of the time, it's just kind of not overlooked, but generally speaking, it's just accepted. But whatever the purchase price is, when the time the contract is executed, that's what the percentage is. We're going to talk a little bit more about this percentage as we get lower down on the page. The and is potentially additional compensation. Most of the time, this line is going to be blank. All right. Are there some, well, when would it be full? I'll tell you, I did one a long time ago. I think I've only done this once in my entire career. And my dad and I, years and years and years ago, my dad was like obsessed with go-kart racing and wanted to be a go-kart racing guy. And anyway, I go over this house in Moreno Valley and go into the garage, and this guy's got this go-kart's ridiculous. It was $10,000, and this was probably like in 1990 or something like that. So it's like, wow, this is really cool. This is a pretty cool go-kart. So we tinkered around with maybe, hey, I tell you what, I'm going to sell your house for free. I'm going to take that go-kart. You can do crazy stuff like that. Okay. Generally speaking, you're not going to do that though. So if you do have something where you're going to take compensation other than a percentage of the sales price and commission, first thing you need to do is think about it long and hard. And then second, come see Drew or come see me. And we might say, you got it. Coldwell Banker Town and Country Go-Kart team, we're in. Okay. Because you got to remember, a piece of that go-kart is mine and Drew's and the companies. Oh, by the way, Coldwell Banker Corporate needs a piece of that go-kart. So we got to figure out how are we going to chop that thing up. Okay. So bottom line is resist the need to be overly creative in here. If you do this business long enough, things will pop up and some of them will sound interesting, but stay away from that. Okay. Now we got 3A1 during the listing period or extension. Broker, that's us. Okay. We are the broker in this particular contract. The cooperating broker, that's anybody other than us. Okay. When it goes into the MLS, again, RE/MAX is going to see it. Berkshire Hathaway is going to see it. So that's who they're referring to when they use the word cooperating broker. Any of the other agencies that are going to have access to the property on the MLS. So we've got during the listing period or any extension, the broker, the cooperating broker, the seller, or any other person who procures a ready, willing, and able buyer who's offered to purchase the property on any price and terms accepted by the seller, provided the buyer completes the transaction or is prevented from completing the transaction or from doing so by the seller. Okay, period. There's a lot going on there. Okay, so let's go through those a little in each example here. So the seller says, I'm going to pay you a commission of 6% at $850,000. Okay. The next paragraph 1 basically says, I'm going to pay you that if you bring me a buyer, if another agent brings me the buyer, if the seller themselves brings a buyer, okay, or anybody else comes ready, willing, and able to purchase that property, a commission is owed. So the main one there that you'll kind of run into periodically is you'll list out. As a matter of fact, I think this just happened to Chris Leeper. I don't know if Misty's on the phone or on the call with us or not. Looks like I don't see her, but I was just talking to Chris about this the other day. He took a listing. The seller felt that they procured a buyer, and the seller basically said, I don't want to pay you. Okay. Well, we can talk about whether that seller is right, wrong, or whatever, but assuming Chris used a standard listing agreement, the seller has no choice. Contractually, the seller is obligated to pay a commission, even if the seller is the one that produced that buyer. Now, there is another place in the form where we can put in some exclusions, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But basically, anybody who brings a buyer in, whether it's you or the broker or the seller or the neighbor across the street, if that buyer is ready, willing, and able, and those terms are acceptable to the seller, that commission is owed. Now, they throw in a little bit of an extra thing in here, and that is provided the buyer completes the transaction. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute. So what they're saying is, if the buyer doesn't close, the commission's not due. So if you have an escrow that falls out, everyone's like, wait a minute, we've been in escrow for 6 months, man. Lance, you've been working really hard. Do I have to pay you? No. Do I have to pay the agent representing the buyer? No. Our compensation in this agreement is based upon the transaction closing. So regardless of where the buyer came from, if the buyer does not complete the transaction, there's no commission. But then they throw in this other one, or is prevented from doing so from the seller. On occasion, I've had this happen a few times. It's a total nightmare. Where somewhere in the transaction, the seller decided that they didn't want to sell anymore. Okay. And in those situations, sometimes they're not completely transparent with you. Sometimes they are, but ultimately it's clear that the seller is trying to prevent the escrow from closing. Okay. Whatever that is. If the seller is doing that, very difficult conversation to have, but contractually, the seller is still obligated to pay you. Okay. Are you going to be able to collect? This is a different story, but contractually, if the seller just, and let's use that husband and wife situation, maybe there's a divorce going on or something like that. And this is one of those cases where this could come up, where one party, the wife wants to sell, the husband doesn't want to sell, your buyers accept that everything's going, you're looking good. The seller originally signed the document, husband and wife, and now the husband says, screw this, I ain't doing it. All right. And he's doing well. The seller in that case is preventing the transaction from closing, irrespective of what the reason is. Okay. Well, they could still very well be responsible for that commission. So that's what they're talking about here. So brokers entitled to compensation, whether any escrow resulting from such offer closes during or after the expiration period or any extension. So again, they're referring to, whatever the cancellation is. So if it's during the listing period or an extension thereof is basically when we're getting paid. So hopefully that's clear. I don't see anybody unmuted, so I'm going to keep on rolling. Continuing on with the expiration. Normally when I do these listings, this is the next paragraph down. I'm also entitled to commission, or paragraph 2, if within how many days, I normally will put 30 or 60 days in here, after the end of the listing period or extension. Okay. So it's like, wait a minute, I can get a commission after the listing has expired. Yes. However, there's very, very specific terms and conditions that apply. So the gist of what these terms are is if the listing is expired, then the seller enters into a contract to sell the property or whatever it happens to be. And they basically sell it to somebody that we showed the property to, we'd worked with the property for, and maybe we even did some negotiations, and they sell it to that person. Okay. We're entitled to commission. Maybe. Okay. And the maybe gets down here near the bottom. One thing we have to do is if we feel this listing is going to expire tomorrow, and we're like, boy, man, it's really unfortunate because, Mr. and Mrs. Jones they really wanted this house, man. They really want this house. They're pretty sure, man, they were going to buy it. I just give me another week. I'm going to sell it to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. So if I really think that Mr. and Mrs. Jones are going to buy this, I need to do this very last sentence. Broker has given seller a written notice with the names of such prospective buyers. I have to say, this is the deal per paragraph, where are we? Per paragraph 3A2. I am notifying you that I believe Mr. and Mrs. Jones may be interested in this property, and paragraph 3A2 would apply. If I don't give them the name and Mr. and Mrs. Jones buy the property, we're entitled to no commission. Okay. So the reality is very, very, very few agents have a listing expire where they actually give names, which makes this paragraph completely mute. You have to be prepared to give them the names. I actually have had this happen before. Long time ago. And the language is exactly the same, when I had it happen to me, but I never gave them the names. My seller was a jerk and they screwed me and all the rest of that, but contractually there was nothing I could do about it. So, so that's what this paragraph means. And again, generally, you put in, 60 days, 90 days, figuring if that Mr. and Mrs. Jones are going to buy it, they're probably going to do it within the next couple of months. You can do a longer period of time. Sometimes your sellers will push back on that, but you need to understand how to explain that. Or if without broker's prior written consent, the property is withdrawn from sale, conveyed, leased, rented, or otherwise transferred or made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller during the listing period. So again, you still owe me 6% if without my approval, you've unilaterally decided I'm selling it, or I've sold it to somebody else, or I rented it to somebody else, or I've otherwise transferred it. I did a quit claim deed to my kid. Well, if you did that and you didn't have our listing broker's approval, you owe us a commission. Or, and I've had this happen several times, or the seller again just decides, screw this, I'm not going to make it more. Nobody's going to show my house. I'm going to let the weeds grow up. If a buyer or an agent come over, I'm going to yell and scream and be crazy. That in effect is a voluntary act on the seller, which is making the property unmarketable. In theory, that's collectible. I've collected this one time in my entire life. I'll never forget the property. It's walking distance from the Moreno Valley office. And this lady was batshit crazy. And we basically enforced this portion of the contract. I had a judgment for $10,000. I think it was somewhere in that neighborhood, which made me feel good, and I never collected it. So good luck with that. Okay, any questions on this paragraph? I don't see anybody unmuted. Going to keep on rolling. So we now continue. If the completion of the sale is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the seller, okay, then the compensation which otherwise would have been unearned under paragraph 3A shall be payable only if the seller collects damages in arbitration. So what are they referring to? The buyer now cancels the deal. Maybe the lender screwed up. Maybe something happened, not the seller's fault though. Something happened other than the seller. The only way that we can get compensation is for the seller to sue the party who breached the contract. If the seller then collects damages from that party, the buyer, let's say, then we are entitled to some compensation, again, which is equal to the amount we're owed or the lesser of 1/2 of damages. So let's suppose our commission was $20,000, but the seller only collected $10,000 in damages. Well, if they only collected $10,000, the most we could get is $5,000. That's what this says. I've never seen this happen. Okay. It just doesn't happen, guys. So, and again, as the listing agent, if I have a seller that does collect damages, I'm like, hey, this is the deal. That deal blew up. If we're going to pursue them, great. If you want to pursue them, that's great. But we're going to sell the house, right? So I relist the house, I resell the house, I get paid. I don't have no expectation of going and collecting damages from the buyer. I've never had it happen. So this is one of those things that you need to know how to explain this to your seller, because sellers will read this and they're going to see this. And what does this mean? And then you get 1/2 of this. So you got to be able to explain it, and then you got to bring them down to reality. Okay. And for those of you that are going to call me, a day from now, a year from now, talk to Drew, talk to me. If there's kind of a legal contractual thing going on, you will generally get 2 answers from us. You will get the contract answer, says, yes, absolutely. The seller is obligated to do whatever it says. Absolutely. The buyer is obligated to do that. Yep. Absolutely. They are liable if they don't do it. And then you get the real answer that says, good luck with that. Okay. It's, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. So many times, especially in our price point, we're not selling $5 million houses. And when we are selling $5 million houses, generally those buyers and sellers have a lot more assets and liquidity. So it's easier to potentially collect damages. We're not in that marketplace. We don't have people with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money. Not only lots of money to collect, but also lots of money to hire attorneys to collect. I know I guess I'm profiling here a little bit, but I'm assuming if you can afford to buy a $5 million house or a $10 million house, you can afford to spend a couple $100,000 on attorney's fees, right? Because that's where a lot of this stuff comes into play. Okay, so that talks about that. In addition, the seller agrees to pay broker. This again, generally is going to be blank. Try not to be creative, but again, I could put, hey, you're going to give me a $5,000 commission and the go-kart. Okay, so be careful with that. Seller has been advised the broker's policy regarding cooperation. What that means is it goes in the MLS. We're going to cooperate with the other brokers throughout the world, more than likely throughout our area, and what that compensation is. So paragraph 1D in effect says, how much of the 6% are we going to basically offer to the cooperating broker? Okay, this has changed dramatically over the years. There was a period of time where if you offered 6%, you offered 3%. Then that changed and said, well, do this. And it's gotten all sorts of, it's all over the place. There's not a legal right and wrong answer. This is part of a business plan for you. But whatever you're going to offer would go here. So if I had a 6% commission, let's just call it a $50,000 commission, and I offer 3% of the 6% to the cooperating broker, then $25,000 of my $50,000 half is going to go to the outside brokerage. So same option you have here is that you had up above. You can either put a percent or you can put a flat dollar amount. Pretty straightforward stuff. One thing you got to be very careful about, and I mentioned, well, of course, you always have to be careful not to do inappropriate things or things that are misleading or breaching a fiduciary duty to your client. But if you say you're offering a 3% commission here, you better offer a 3% commission to the MLS. Okay, you just can't say, oh, yeah, I'm going to tell them I'm going to do this, but then over here, I'm going to offer less. Number one, that's dishonest and you're just defrauding your client in theory. Even though the dollar amount itself is the same, you can't do that. So you put that in there, and ultimately your seller is going to get a commission instruction in front of them, and it's going to say $25,000 goes to Coldwell Banker Town and Country, $25,000 goes to ABC Real Estate. And they're going to look at that and say, wait a minute, I thought we were doing 3%. Why are you getting 30 grand and they're only getting 20s? Did you change something? You didn't tell me that. So don't do that. Brokers authorized to cooperate with and compensate brokers operating outside the MLS per broker's policy. So what this is saying is that, guys, this is really getting into the weeds. But the way our compensation is governed is through the MLS rules. We're all MLS members, we're all board members, and we're not allowed to play games with the commission. Well, what happens if you're dealing with an agent who's not part of the MLS, outside of the broker's policy? This basically says we can also work with them as well. And generally speaking, we would offer them the same thing. So maybe there's an agent who's retired or a broker who's retired and they're not really active. They're not members of the board. They're not members of the MLS, but they're bringing us an offer. They can do that. They're licensed in the state of California. They can do that. But we're not obligated to pay them anything because our contract with the other agent is through the MLS. This in effect says we can cooperate with them. We can pay them. And what would we do? Give them the same thing as we would give the other broker. We'd give them 3%. Okay, I don't see anybody unmuted. I'm going to keep on rolling. Seller hereby
Hey, Lance, I have a question because I'm a little confused on sub A above, because the example you used earlier that, we have a listing for 900,000.
Yep.
We're able to get an offer to purchase at 850. So if you look at sub A, we're going to get a 6% commission
when you say
on
sub A,
list price.
are you talking about this paragraph?
I'm talking about 3A. 3A. Where,
Okay.
we're getting 6% on the list price.
Right.
And then we get a purchase agreement offer of 850, still at 6%.
6% of
But
it. Yep.
now our seller is telling us, hey, look, I don't want 850, I want 900,000,
Yep.
and I'm not going to agree to it, and I'm going to let the listing expire. And then all of a sudden it expires.
Yep.
The seller goes out and hires Century 21.
Yep.
And they market it for 30 days, and they get an offer for 850, and the
Yep.
seller concedes and says, "Okay, I'm selling it. Let's go to escrow. Let's close this deal."
Yep.
Would we have a right to request during that 60-day period after the listing expires? Would we have a right to make a request for a commission since the seller got the same same 850,000 offer that we presented them?
Potentially, but you're too late. And in the example you gave me, if you were going to assert that, you should have asserted earlier. Okay. So this is the deal. When the seller says, I'm going to list the house for 850. Okay. And you bring them an offer for 850 and they don't accept 850. So, okay, that's fine. You don't have to accept 850, but you owe me 6%. Okay. You've changed your mind. You agreed when you signed the listing agreement that you would sell it for 850. Now, and by the way, this happens all the time. Okay.
No,
So-
but my example is that the list price is 900,000, and we present an offer for 850. He says no.
Understood. Okay, then the answer is, I apologize, I misunderstood that. No, you're not entitled to anything.
Okay.
When you had it listed for 900 grand, you got to bring it on. Well, you don't have to, but if you bring an offer for 895 and they don't accept it, you did not meet the terms and conditions of the listing agreement. They agree to sell for 900. You couldn't do it. 4 months go by, they've softened their position. Now they're willing to come down to 850, which is the offer that you had, but they weren't there 6 months ago. Now they're there. They're listed with somebody else. They get paid. You don't. You're out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so let's keep on rolling. Sorry about that, Julio. You're out. No soup for you. Okay, so I think we went through this. We did go through that. Okay, so this talks about seller hereby irrevocably assigns the broker the above compensation and funds and proceeds in escrow. What this is saying is this is actually not completely accurate. This is in conflict with what we actually do in reality. But what the contract says is once the seller signs this and says, hey, you're going to get 6% of 850, and they open the offer, this in effect says the seller is irrevocably assigning to the broker that money. Okay, so it's done. Technically true, contractually true, but in escrow, you guys have seen this if you've done a deal before. Escrow is going to draft what's called, commission authorization, and it will spell it out. It will repeat it, just like everything in escrow. Escrow repeats everything in the contract. It repeats all the terms. And the seller will have a document that's put in front of them that says, per the listing agreement, it doesn't actually say per the listing agreement, but it's based upon the listing agreement. Seller agrees to pay Coldwell Banker Town and Country $25,000. Seller agrees to pay ABC Realty $25,000. That should match up with what the listing agreement has said. In effect, what this says is the seller is not allowed to change their mind after that. Okay, they're irrevocably agreeing to that. So if they did, and I've never had that happen, by the way, I don't think. I mean, I know Drew could chime in and say, yeah, wait, remember Mrs. Smith? And I know Dwayne's been in business forever. Maybe Dwayne's had that happen, but I've never had a seller basically in effect change. Now, I have had sellers that have come back and said, well, geez, I didn't know I was going to have to replace the roof and the septic and all the rest of that, and I'm dying. Will you help me out? Those are different conversations. But I've never had them specifically say, I don't want to pay after they'd agreed to pay me. The seller is not previously entered into a listing agreement. So the seller in effect says, hey, you're the only person I'm dealing with. Okay. And if I have, then I'm going to put it in here. Those of you that are working expired listings, canceled listings, withdrawn listings, this is an area that you're going to want to potentially keep a little bit of extra focus on. You know that they were listed with ABC Real Estate previously. It says it's expired in the MLS. You're out there, they say they want to list with you. Well, let's make sure they haven't been talking to 4 other people. And let's make sure they haven't, the husband wasn't out initial in the contract that the wife didn't know about. So this is where they would go in the event that they had done something. Be very, very, very careful if the sellers are saying, oh yeah, I've still got something going on with somebody else, even though it's not on the MLS. This also says that the seller warrants they're under no obligation to pay additional compensation. Sellers don't like to pay twice. So we're getting it in writing right now that says, hey, they don't have to pay twice. Unless the property is transferred to any. Okay, and then again, this would be an exception where this is different. This is the exact opposite of what we talked about a minute ago, where Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we think they're going to buy it after listing expires. This is a seller that says, I will list with you, Isela. I will list you with my house and I will pay you a commission if you sell my house. However, I've been talking to my coworker at the office, Sally Smith, and Sally might buy this house and she's going to let me know sometime in the next couple of weeks. If Sally Smith comes and says she wants to buy the house, I'm not paying you. Okay. So this is where the seller would put in the name of the person that in effect would exclude you from getting paid. All right. It's not common, but again, you do with this business long enough, you're going to run into those circumstances. Quite honestly, every time I've done it, I'm actually the one who's prompted to put it in there. I use it almost as like a closing technique. I'm like, hey, it looks like we're ready to go. What's going on? And, let's get this thing going. And I can tell there's a hesitation. You kind of go through some objections and you find out the hesitation is, well, Lance, I don't know, man. My coworker, Sally Smith, is thinking about it. I said, is that the only thing that's preventing us from moving forward? It is. Then I'll tell you what, let's list it right now. I'm going to go ahead and put Sally Smith's name in here. If Sally buys the house, you don't owe me anything. Okay. So that's generally how I end up putting those in there, but that's what that's for. If the property is sold to anyone listed above during the time, seller is obligated to compensate another broker. Broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement, and broker is not obligated to reject the seller. So this is kind of like a for sale by owner situation. If there is an exclusion over here with Sally Smith, okay, and we basically said we're not going to get paid, well, that's fine. If you end up selling it to Sally Smith or anybody on that list, that's cool, but you're not going to pay me. Therefore, I'm not going to represent you. Okay, I'm not involved in the transaction anymore. I don't want the liability associated with that transaction. Okay, moving right along. Items included and excluded. It is exactly what it says. Just be careful when it comes to this. What is the seller going to exclude? Hey, I'm taking the ceiling fan. That was my great grandmother's from Hungary. I'm taking it. Or I'm including the pool equipment or whatever it happens to be. Keep in mind, fixtures are included regardless. My ceiling fan example is a fixture. So if they want the ceiling fan, let's exclude it now, because if they don't exclude it, it stays contractually. My advice on these things, this is a little bit outside of contract college. This is more like kind of real life practice. My advice on these things is if a seller wants the ceiling fan, or anything else for that matter, tell them to take it down today, because I'm going to do an open house this weekend. I don't want the buyer to see it. Just take it down. You don't even have to replace it. Just put a cap up there. But once you start putting those things in, a buyer sees a property, they write an offer, and then you put in the MLS, oh, by the way, all the ceiling fans are going to be replaced. Quite honestly, it happens all the time. It's done all the time. You're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. You're going to put in seller's going to put in a cheap ass ceiling fan. The buyer wants the super nice one that looked like it came from Europe, and you didn't give him one of those. So you're included and excluded. Seller includes the above items, again, to be included or included, kind of goes through what that is. It just kind of outlines it. Leased or not owned items. This is very common. This wasn't in the contract previously. So I am leasing the solar system. I am leasing the alarm system. I am leasing the propane tank, whatever it happens to be. Those items need to be listed. And then if they are leased, you're going to need to get that lease agreement. What are the terms of that solar panel? Can it be transferred? Of course, most of the time they can. How much is left on the lease? In other words, what is the buyer going to have to assume? What are the fees associated with it, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that's liened. So sometimes you'll get a little confused on this because it even has some of the same things. Is a solar panel system leased or is a solar panel system liened? Well, there's a difference. A lease means I don't own it. It's owned by ABC Solar and I'm paying them a lease like I would on a car. Liened means I own it, but I have a lien against it. Normally that's a property tax lien where if I don't pay my additional property tax, these would be things like hero programs and stuff like that. If I don't pay that, not only do I not get my solar panels, I could lose my house. So be very, very careful with these. Make sure you understand what's included, what's excluded. This just happened. I can't remember who the agent was. We just went through one of these and a lot of drama. I think it was Iran. I don't know if, or not Iran. I think it was Mealy. I don't remember who it was, but at any rate, a lot of drama. After 2 weeks, ultimately the buyer and seller sorted it out and figured out what was what, but it was a big deal. It was like a $30,000 differential between the buyer and the seller. So be very, very careful, list that, do your due diligence when you list the property. This next paragraph basically is an attempt to explain what the multiple listing service is to the seller. What is the multiple listing? I'm not going to read this whole paragraph. It's just a shared database. Listings are put into this system. They're disseminated across the country, across the world, and we cooperate. This is where the cooperating broker comes from. It comes from the multiple listing service. What information is provided in there? Basically, everything about your property is going to be in there. It's going to be published. It's going to be on the web. There's going to be photographs. There's going to be everything. They're going to see it all. This used to be a big deal when we were kind of really getting into this, internet age. Now everybody seems to be pretty much comfortable with it. But you will have clients. We've had escrows that have closed, and after close of escrow, the new buyers like, hey, I want to take all those pictures off the internet. I don't want people seeing the inside of my house I just bought. Good luck with that. Not happening. It's just out there. There's nothing you can do about it. So everything goes in there, and you'll have some sellers that, well, I don't want to disclose the sales price. I don't want anybody to know what I sold the house for. It's public information. Every stitch of documentation is basically public, with the exception of some of the excluded stuff. We certainly don't publish social security numbers or anything like that, but the names of the buyers and sellers will be published. I don't want anybody to know. It's public information. Okay, if you don't want anybody to know who bought the house, probably the best way you could do that is go open an LLC or a corporation, and it's the ABC Corporation officer Lance Martin. It'll hide it a little bit, but most corporations are public as well. So if someone wants to know who's the director of the ABC Corporation, you just go to a different website. Now oh, Lance Martin is part of the ABC Corporation. So everything is public. What is Brokers MLS? So who are we participating in? So if you are part of CRMLS, which is frankly everybody on this call, that's what you would put in there. Okay. What they're talking about here is the MLS that you're a member of, is that the MLS that services this area. For example, Drew and I sold a whole bunch of properties, and Drake as well, sold a whole bunch of properties up in Bakersfield. Bakersfield is not part of CRMLS. Bakersfield is part of the Bakersfield MLS. So if I go to list a house in Bakersfield and I tell them I'm with CRMLS, if that seller knows what they're doing, they're going to say, well, shouldn't you be part of the Bakersfield MLS? Well, yeah, I should, but I'm cheap and I don't want to join it. Well, maybe I don't want to list with you. Okay. And not only does it go that far, it truly then gives the next option. That MLS is, if checked, not the primary as for the geographics. You would have to disclose that. So I am in an area that I'm not accustomed to working in. My primary MLS is different. So I'm telling you right here, I'm in that area, which by the way, don't do that. Don't do that. That's, if you're gonna go to Bakersfield and take a listing, be prepared to spend the money to join the association and join the proper board. This used to be a bigger deal than it is right now, but that's what they're referring to here.
Hey Lance.
Yep.
I had a quick question for you. How far does the CR MLS go? Is it like mainly Southern California?
It's southern, it's almost huge. At some point in time, it'll probably cover the entire state. When I say it's almost huge, it is huge. But there's pockets. Okay, there are pockets that it doesn't cover. So most of the area you're in, you're going to be good. But Bakersfield, for example, is true. They've got their own deal. There's little pockets carved out here and there where I mean, I can't go through every city. It's huge. It's the largest MLS in the country. Let's put it that way. It covers, I'm going to throw out a guesstimate, I don't know, 60%. I don't know if Drew or Dwayne knows, but I think 60% of California. And it does all, I mean, you'll go in there and it'll, parts of Northern California are part of Sierra MLS. But again, Bakersfield's not. That's a whole lot of politics and a bunch of nonsense going on with that. But you got to know where you're at. It's very important if you get out of your area to know if your MLS covers it. Okay, this little box here is kind of a box that we had a bunch of agents doing a bunch of nonsense. And because they did a bunch of nonsense for a period of time, we now have this lovely box, which basically tells the seller that you need to put your property in the MLS. You need to get maximum exposure. If your agent's telling you not to put it in the MLS and they're going to double end it and they're going to do a pocket listing and all of these things, in effect, this is saying that's probably not in your best interest. Okay. 98% of the time, not going to be in your seller's best interest to exclude it from the MLS because you want to sell it yourself. I'm going to keep it off the market for 5 days. I'm going to do an open house and I'm going to sell it. We have all sorts of rules now, which can get you in a lot of trouble if you don't do that properly, which in effect is disclose. So this paragraph intersects says the obvious. Hey, additional exposure through the MLS. What's the impact of opting out? Well, less exposure, right? And what's that mean? Reduction in exposure. All right. If you're not in the MLS, who knows about it? Me, and maybe the 20 people on my team or the 200 people in my office. If I'm in the MLS, who knows about it? The world, truly the world. It's not just, the people in our area. Sierra MLS, it gets syndicated almost immediately. There's people on the other side of the planet that now know there's a listing on 123 Main Street. So bottom line is put it in the MLS. And if you don't, it's in effect, your seller is acknowledging that their coverage is going to be limited. Their exposure is going to be limited. And it's pretty tough to get a seller to sign this if they truly understand and you explain it to them. But if you are doing this and you're not going to put it in the MLS, they're going to sign here and you're going to sign there, and everyone, you're going to make sure you cross the T's and dot the I's on that. Now, there are some cases where this is appropriate. I've done them. I'll do them again. You guys will do them. So we can talk about those, at a different time when you think you're running into that situation, but they're few and far between. Public marketing of the property. So in effect, this kind of gets back to that policy we were just talking about. Is our MLS rules now say you must put the property in the MLS within 1 business day, otherwise you're violating our MLS rules. Okay, so that's that clear cooperation policy. It's the policy now, it has to be done. If you do have a good reason to keep it out of clear, to pull it off the market for a period of time, maybe the seller is doing a rehab, it's listed, but hey, don't show it, don't do anything with it because I'm going to put in new carpet. Okay, so you're listed, but you're off the market. Okay, well, during that period of time, no sign in the yard, no Facebook posts, no flyers, no nothing. As soon as you put a sign in the yard, you've got to put it in the MLS. As soon as you do a Facebook post that says, hey, coming soon, I got a new listing on 123 Main Street, you've got to put it in the MLS. Again, these rules have changed and modified over the last several years, but the bottom line is put it in the MLS. Honestly, I've never understood why this is such a big deal to some people, but this is actually, interestingly enough, has even become something that's important to the public. The days on market is a big deal. And you'll even have sellers that will, talk about, hey, my days on market are too high, cancel my listing and put it back in. Haven't had that in a while. What this basically says is days on market, these days on market now are cumulative. So if you do a coming soon, it's going to impact your days on market. So if it's coming soon in 2 weeks, well, when you actually do hit the market, it's going to show you've been on the market for 14 days. Okay. So guys, don't worry about this. I really don't understand why people make such a big deal about this. If you've got a nice listing and it's priced right, it's going to sell. You know, there are agents and people that do look at listings that just came on the market today. But again, you got a nice listing, it's priced right, it's going to sell. Seller instructs the broker. Seller may require this is the seller exclusion of the listing agreement. So now this is kind of the example I just gave you. The seller says, do not market my property until this particular date and time. So I listed it today, but I don't want you to start marketing it until March 1st because they're doing something, or maybe they're sick. Hey, I'm sick. Oh my gosh, I don't want anybody at my house. And I don't even know that I'm going to be in my right mind to even look at or entertain offers. Take me off the market for this till this particular date and time. When you get that, you will use the seller exclusion from listing marketing, the SELM form, and make sure you get the seller to sign that. There are a lot of these violations, by the way, are actually reported by other real estate agents. Okay. So if you're kind of wondering, well, how would anybody know? And how am I going to get in trouble? And who's going to do this? What ends up happening is another real estate agent drives by the property and they see a for sale sign. Like, well, that looks like something my buyer might want. Okay. Or they see a Facebook post. Hey, that looks like something my buyer wants. They go to the MLS and they can't find it. Okay. And now, boom, they're going to violate you. There's a button in the MLS that says, hey, report Andy Sawyer. He's a bad guy. This is what he's doing. So that's where most of these violations come in. Okay, top of page 3. Again, this is just a continuation of what we just talked about. If you check the box, seller instructs broker not to market the property to the public. Seller understands that no public marketing will in effect reduce the promotion, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, whether paragraph 7.1 D or 7D1 or 7D2 are selected, seller understands and agrees that should any public marketing be done, the property goes in the MLS. That's what I just said. Okay, so even if the seller says don't do it, if you do anything, a Facebook post, that's public marketing. It's got to put it in the MLS. Again, the rules when clear cooperation policy does not apply. I'm spending a lot of time on this, guys. I'm just telling you, just stay away from this. You're just asking for trouble if you do the pocket listings. And most of us aren't able to do what used to be done. Holding an open house, it's public marketing. You can't have a pocket listing without that way. MLS data on the internet. Again, I kind of touched base on this already. Everything's going to go out there. Everything goes out there. Everything goes out there. Photos, pictures, whatever. Got pictures of your furniture, all that sort of stuff. There was a period of time where the address, we had some options to keep the address off the internet. Bottom line is it's just not practical anymore. The seller can instruct the broker to opt out. I don't want to go on Zillow, or I don't want to go here. You can do that. Okay. Normally, it's exactly the opposite. Everybody wants to opt in. So you want to be in all those particular places. So things have changed over the last several years. Comments, you got to be careful where you put your comments, what you write in your comments, all that sort of stuff. There are rules about, all sorts of words you can and cannot use. Something as simple as, putting in lockbox codes in the comments. Well, obviously you don't want to put a lockbox code in the comment that goes publicly. And now everybody knows that the lockbox code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Automated estimated value. Hey, are you going to have an automated value? This is like a Zillow value, for example. All sorts of different automated values are out there. So you go to coldwellbanker.com, you take a listing, the listing ends up on coldwellbanker.com. A consumer goes there, it's listed for $850. They click a button, it says, well, according to our program, the house is worth $810. All right. Or they go to Zillow, right? We're listed for $850. The Zillow estimate is different than $850. That's in effect what they're referring to here is the automated values could be different than what you're listed at. Seller representation. This has been, and I love to use the listing agreement as actually part of my listing presentation. This is a great opportunity to ask the seller, hey, we're getting ready to do this. Just checking with you. Are you current on your payments? Are you current on your HRA dues? Have you filed bankruptcy? Are you getting a divorce? What's going on here? All of those things have an impact on your ability to sell this house. Okay. A notorious one, you get couples that can get in trouble all the time and they're getting divorced. They're thinking about getting a divorce and they call you, they're selling the house. And then you find out after you're listed and you find out after you're gone into escrow that they're in divorce, okay? Which, by the way, not necessarily a problem, but could be a problem, okay? Or you're in escrow and you're a week away from close of escrow and your seller doesn't tell you, but the seller goes out and files bankruptcy. Well, guess what happened? You're not closing escrow, okay? A buyer or seller cannot be in bankruptcy and close an escrow. That property would have to be removed from the bankruptcy. It takes time. So you need to have these conversations with your sellers and make sure, especially, I mean, all the time, quite honestly, but if you have a seller where you know there's some financial distress going on there, just ask them the question, are you current on your payments? I need to know, it's critical. Are you current on your HOA? It's critical. Just use the bankruptcy word. Have you filed bankruptcy? Are you considering file bankruptcy? It's critical that we know you can still sell your house, but if I know now, I can prepare for what that means moving forward. So again, the seller is going through and making some direct assertions as to what their condition is. Brokers and sellers' responsibilities. If you ever have a seller that calls you and says, Lance, I'm a little concerned about your exercising reasonable effort and due diligence to achieve the purposes of selling my house. They're reading right from the contract. What they're telling you is that they're going to cancel their agreement. Okay. So in effect, I just read the sentence that's material. You have to use a reasonable effort and due diligence basically to sell the house. If you're not doing that, they're going to be able to cancel whether you have this language in here or not, whatever that may mean. This also doesn't mean that you have to hold open houses every weekend or you have to spend $1 million in advertising. Irene, you're unmuted. Oh, no, you're not.
Yeah,
No.
yes, I am, Lance. I got a question. You were talking about asking the seller if they're maybe in arrears or if they, if they're behind, caught up on their payments.
Yep.
If a seller tells you that they are behind on payments, can they still sell their house and just whatever money comes out of it kind of goes to the payments? Because is that what can happen?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. I mean, there's
Okay.
some potential challenges and maybe a different answer under certain circumstances, but that's exactly what happens. And this is where you have to be the professional and have these conversations with them. Because if you got a seller that's behind, or maybe they even had a notice of default filed, or maybe they're in the middle of a divorce, or they're thinking, guys, there is maximum pressure. You guys understand that. We all have personal things in our lives. Everyone's been under those type of extreme pressures at some point in their life. Well, in this transaction, they're under all of those pressures, but they also don't understand how it works. This is why agents with knowledge will, frankly, not only be able to help their clients, but do better in these type of markets. So you can explain to them, yes, I understand you're stressed out. Let's take a look at it. Okay, great. You owe $300,000 on the house. Oh my goodness, you owe $70,000 in back payments and attorney's fees, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the deal. I can sell this house for $450,000. And after we pay the commissions and we pay the fees, we can pay off that back payment, get you all caught up, get you out of this house. And based upon my net sheet, it's not what you want, but you're still going to walk away with 30 grand or whatever the number happens to be. Okay. Now, if there's a negative equity situation, different conversation than Irene and I just had, but still a sellable property. It's funny. I was talking to one of my buddies yesterday or day before, and we're just talking about the market and how we don't think we're going to have any significant REOs and this or that. But we both agreed that, you know what, we might not have that type of stuff, but we definitely could see some short sales in this marketplace. Definitely could see some short sales. Well, what's a short sale? Well, not today's class, but be prepared on short sales. And quite honestly, we both think that if we do end up in a little bit of a short sale market for some properties, that the lenders will be very willing to do short sales. So kind of gets to Irene's comment just a little bit, but the short answer is you can sell a property that's in bankruptcy. Takes more time. You got to go to the bankruptcy court. You got to get the property removed from the bankruptcy. You got to get some court stuff. You can get that done. You certainly can sell properties where there's a divorce pending. But again, the more you know upfront on what those challenges are, the better off you're going to be. Okay, so again, I think we covered the broker's responsibilities and authorities, representation of offers. This in effect is that line in the contract that says that we submit all offers to the seller unless the seller gives broker written instruction to the contrary. I've done this 35 years. I've sold, 10,000 houses, maybe more. I've never once had the seller tell me don't submit offers in writing or otherwise. So don't even go there. Just submit every offer. It's just the way to go. Buyer supplemental offer letters. This is relatively new. back in the old days, is very common and recommended and best practice to have your buyer write a letter. Hey, I'm Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We've got 2 kids and a dog, and we really want your house, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and grandma lives across the street, and we want to go to the school and all the rest of that sort of stuff for a variety of reasons. More so, do we have some potentially discriminatory practices that could come out of that? Could we have a seller that likes one letter better than another letter, and the only reason they chose the buyer is because, oh, this buyer is so cute and they've got a little family with 2 dogs and 2 kids, and we have 2 dogs and we have 2 kids. We're going to accept their offer because the other family doesn't have 2 dogs and 2 kids. Well, now you've discriminated against people without dogs and people without kids. Now, of course, it can get a lot more ugly, and we have racial components, sexual orientation components, whatever it happens to be. So the general practice now is do not write or ask your buyer to write buyer letters. And we used to call them like love letters, oh, I love your house, blah, 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 please sell it to me. If you do get one of those letters, the recommendation is that we basically don't submit it to the seller. So we talk to the seller, they check this box and says, hey, I'm not interested in doing that. And if they do it, then again, the seller is relying on buyer letters. The seller is acting against our advice. Can be very, very careful, guys. No one wants to be accused of any sort of discriminatory action. And when this first came out, I thought, oh my gosh, this is silly. And why are we doing this? We've gone too far. I could see where this could potentially be a challenge though. So anyway, stay away from the buyer letters to the seller. Seller agrees to consider offers seller agrees to consider offers presented by the broker, to do that in good faith. Okay. And again, among other things, that also means I've got to make the property available. I've got to do it at a reasonable period of time. Okay. If somebody comes in, I'm going to refer the brokers. This is basically the seller acting in good faith. So a seller has a responsibility to act in good faith, not get the house listed, and then do everything they can to avoid paying a commission. That undermines and defeats the purpose of the contract. Again, this is between buyer and seller. Investigative reports. The seller agrees that these things are going to be done. So they have to do a natural hazard disclosure report, but do they have to do a termite? No. General property inspection, HOA, whatever it happens to be. So these would be the reports that the seller is agreeing in advance that they are going to provide to the buyer. I'll just use one as an example. If the property is just riddled with termites and it's just obvious we've got a problem, I very well would potentially, not always, but potentially recommend that the seller get a termite structural pest control report prior to putting it on the market, just so we know what we're dealing with. And that's what they're referring to. Here. Again, seller's going to hold harmless from litigation or judgments arising out of any of this stuff. Hey, it's your property, it's your inspector. I might have recommended them, but hey, this is you. Okay. So, if the property has termites, don't come to me and hold me responsible for that. This is the bottom of page 3. Talks about the deposit. This is the deposit that a buyer's agent / buyer would bring towards the purchase of the property. All this says is that the broker is authorized to accept and hold on the seller's behalf any deposit applied by the purchase price. That doesn't mean we can accept offers. It doesn't mean we can accept terms. All that does is allow us as the broker to say, hey, I have an offer from RE/MAX. Oh, and by the way, it has a $5,000 deposit attached to it. Now, the irony of this is this used to actually have meaning because we used to actually get deposits when we wrote offers. We don't get deposits when we write offers anymore. And for those of you that are writing offers and you're asking the buyer to give you a $10,000 check or whatever it happens to be, stop doing that. Okay. Now, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you had taken an offer and you did not get a check from the buyer for the amount of the earnest money deposit, I would have scolded you. And I would have said, you're a weak agent. Go get that darn deposit. Have them pull out that checkbook and write a check. We are in different times. This has everything to do with trust fund handling, or unfortunately trust fund mishandling. It's far too easy to make a mistake, guys, far too easy. So I don't care how careful you are. Just don't take any deposits. The buyers will wire their deposits straight into escrow. after the offer is accepted. So paragraph 11 is less meaningful than it certainly once was. Agency, okay, get to go a little bit faster here because we've already discussed this, okay? In class 1, we talked about the agency disclosure. We spent multiple times. Here it is referred to, the AD, seller's representation. We've talked about that. We've talked about the possibility of dual agents with the buyer. So this is the deal. This is one of the advantages, guys. If you did not attend last week's class, and you're like, well, Lance, I need you to cover all this. Well, I'm not going to cover all this. Most of the people on here, we talked about all this last week. So if you weren't on last week's class, go back and watch last week's video. We talk about dual agency. We talk about confirmation. We talk about competing buyers and sellers. We talked about terminating agency relationship. So everything here is basically pulled out of the AD form that we talked about last week. Moving right along. Security, insurance, and showing. We're telling the seller, maintain your security system, keep your insurance in place, be aware that people are going to come in your house, don't leave your jewelry out, blah, 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 blah. If you have security cameras, be aware that there's security cameras, and this is more of a disclosure to a buyer than anybody else. By the way, a buyer, what do you mean to a buyer? Well, if you come to my house and I'm selling my house and you go out on my back patio and you start talking about, hey, I think I'm going to offer the buyer this or the seller this, my security cameras, unlike a lot of other or just like a lot of other security, they record video and audio, because seller can be sitting there listening to every single word that you say about their house and the negotiation process. So be careful with them. But again, yeah.
If somebody enters the property and you have cameras and you're recording out, do you need to disclose that?
Yeah, well, it's already
showing the property.
Yeah, well, it's technically, it's kind of already disclosed. It's in part of the agreements that we have. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it does get disclosed. But you as an agent, keep in mind, if you're showing a property, you may not have put any paperwork in front of the buyer yet. So they may not be even thinking about that. So you as the agent representing the buyer, and again, I feel like an old man here, but in the old days, we just walk around the house and we talk freely, right? Oh my, this house is ugly. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Oh man, it smells like cat in here and it stinks. And offer him 600, but I will go to 650. What are you have those conversations thinking that no one was listening? Everybody's listening, right? Everybody's listening. So
As a listing agent, what about as a listing agent?
What about it? Well, again, everybody's listening. So even if you don't see cameras, I mean, I'm sitting at my office desk right now. My Alexa is looking right at me, and my wife could be in Long Beach right now doing a drop-in on Alexa in my office and listening to every word I say. Right? You guys know how that works. Technology is crazy. So this is what this is talking about. So you all need to be very, very careful when you're in these people's houses for negotiation purposes or whatever. The main paragraph that this is referring to is not so much what we're referring to. This is, hey, keep your insurance in place. Understand that you're going to have people in your property. Understand that, things potentially could walk away. Very, very rarely happens, but again, it does. And again, here, kind of to your point, Javier, seller's advised to post notice disclosing the existence of the cameras. So a lot of agents, you'll see that. You'll go in and it'll say, hey, this property is under surveillance. There's no statute that says that as far as I know. And if it was, it wouldn't say seller advised, it would say seller is required, right? But just be aware, best practice. Okay, photographs, we already talked about this. Everything goes on the internet, it's gonna be there. So, if the seller has a problem with that, sorry, this is the world we live in right now. We covered that one. Key safes and lock boxes. If you're gonna put a lockbox on the property, the seller needs to check the box, and you will use form, KLM or whatever the heck it is. KLA. So I do not recommend putting lock boxes on tenant occupied properties. It does give you an option to do that. I would stay away from that like the plague. It's so funny. Signs have gone out of vogue. Guys, take a listing, put a damn sign in the yard, check the box. I don't want to sign. I don't want to sign. Do your job, explain your value, convince your seller that the best practice is to put a sign in the yard. But they do basically have to check the box. Yes, I want a lockbox. Yes, I want a sign. These boxes are about as secure as they get.
I have a question about the sign.
Sure.
I have a listing. When my client signed the contract, they told me they didn't want a for sale sign, and then
Yep.
the other day she told me to put one. Do I need to do an addendum for that?
You know what? I wouldn't. I would just send her a text or an email. It says, hey, just confirming you want to put a sign up. Just please reply back. Could you do an addendum? Sure. Would it be nice to have it in the file? Sure. If you have an email from the seller or a text message that says, hey, I've changed my mind, put a sign up, I'm perfectly fine with that. But I definitely would get something in writing from them acknowledging that, hey, I want to sign up today.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hey, by the way, we're going to go a little bit later, guys. I do want to finish this section. So this is kind of like, hey, are we going to go 125? Are we going to go 140? Today, we might go maybe another 10 minutes. I want to get through this section. Attorney's fees. Keep in mind, this is a listing agreement. This is a list. This agreement is between the seller and Coldwell Banker, the brokerage. What they're referring to here is if the Coldwell Banker, the brokerage, and the seller are not agreeing, they want to sue each other. There's attorney's fees involved. This is what they're referring to. This has nothing to do with the buyer and the seller. However, when you get to the RPA, the exact same language is in the RPA. When it refers to attorney fees in the RPA, they're talking about attorney's fees when the buyers and sellers are feuding. In this particular case, this is seller and listing agent or brokerage feuding, which, by the way, we don't feud. If you're not happy with me, I'm out. Okay. Now, just real quick on this. If you guys get into hot water with your seller and there's a problem and they're being ridiculous and you want to go to war, come to Drew and I. We'll talk about it. We got your back. We might go to war, but it's really going to depend. Okay. What are we going to war for? I've been doing this a long time. I'm a very practical person. Guys, you want to go to war? Okay. Who's got $7,500,000? What do I need that for? Well, if you want to go to war, generally that means you're going to sue somebody. Your most basic lawsuit will take you 2 years and $100,000 of attorney's fees. The basic of the basic. All right. So depending upon that war is, that war may not be fought. I got to tell you, they're few and far between. They're few and far between. Doesn't mean we won't cause some heartburn, write some nasty letters, get your back, see what we can do to get some movement. But generally speaking, we're not hiring attorneys on these transactions unless the direction's coming our way. In other words, we're getting sued. Additional terms. Are we using an REO advisory? We will go through every single one of these forms in a subsequent class. Management approval, that's us. So if you're a brand new agent, what this in effect is saying is this listing agreement needs to be approved by Drew or Drake or myself or Paul. I don't know that we've ever said we're canceling the listing. But if you're in a situation where you think, oh my gosh, maybe I've done something I shouldn't, I better get manager's approval, bring it to us before you get the thing signed. Let's no sense in going through all that headache. Successors and assignees, this basically means if the seller dies, or says, hey, I'm going away, I'm gonna let my brother handle this. Whoever the successor or assignee is, this listing agreement is bound. They're bound by it. Dispute resolution, end of paragraph 4, top of paragraph 5. Oops. Wait a minute. Did I get something out of order? Okay, I'm sorry. There we go. So I know what happened. I apologize. So dispute resolution is, I hate the way this is formatted. I don't know why they just couldn't have kicked this down to the bottom or top of page 5. Instead, the dispute resolution header is on the bottom of page 4, and then it starts on page 5. I just seems silly, but at any rate, so mediation is mandatory in the contract. Okay, so this is between seller and brokerage. If there's a problem, we are agreeing in advance to mediate. You cannot sue me. I cannot sue you unless we agree to mediate first. Okay, mediation is not binding. So again, you could go to mediation. I've been to several of them. I'm generally not a big fan. But this just basically kind of talks about the process of mediation. You go through it, mediator says, yes, you're right, you're wrong. Okay, well, that's great. I don't believe you. It's not binding. Then you could go to an arbitration, or ultimately you could go to court. Again, 35 years in this, on a listing mediation, I think twice, maybe twice, maybe 3 times at the most. The entire agreement, this in effect says what you've got is it. There's no other agreements. This is important, especially for those of you that have been like working on a listing for a long period of time. I've been talking to the seller for months and months and months and months. You've talked about all sorts of different things. Now you're finally listing it. the example I use is, okay, is everything that we've talked about in the last 3 months incorporated in this listing agreement? Did we forget anything? We were doing the 1031 and you said you wanted to keep the shed and you were going to remove grandma's fan and you wanted to leave the firewood on the side of the house and whatever happened. Did we get all of those things in here, or did we forget something that we talked about 2 months ago? So this is the agreement, the only agreement, period. This in effect says that the seller owns the house. Probably a conversation that should have been had a little earlier in the process, but yes, I own it. I have the authority to sign it, and there's nobody else that we have to worry about to get their signature in order to move forward. Who is the authorized signer? Generally speaking, we're talking about trust or probate or whatever it happens to be. So you're legally authorized to sign the property. When we get to the representative capacity form, which will probably be not next session, the following section, it ties back specifically to the authorized signer and the legal signer. So here are our seller's entities. I'm not going to go through this a whole lot because we're going to go through this when we do the RPA signature and when we're going to do the representative capacity. But the seller, the entity, whatever it happens to be, we check the box appropriately. Bottom line, this is where the seller is going to sign. Again, we cover this in a later class, but if it's part of a trust or if it's part of a probate, in some cases, you'll actually have a court case. You would put that there. Everything in this paragraph, when we get to those forms, will go into actually super duper deep dive. Sellers are going to sign here. Print name, et cetera, and the additional signature addendum. I think it was Irene earlier, or somebody says, well, what happens if I have more sellers? You check this box, and now I'm going to put my additional sellers in that box. So the brother, the sister, the grandpa from Tennessee, whatever it happens to be. So they all will jump into here. Now we get to the bottom of the form. That's us. Okay, so the firm is Coldwell Banker Town and Country. Our address, our license number at the firm goes here. Your name would go here as the agent. It'll populate into the form if you've got your WIN form set up. You will sign here your DRE license here. If you have a teammate or you're using another agent, you've got the ability to do a second one on the form. Or if you're using which you can do, it's rare, but you've got two brokers with two different companies, you're going to use form ABA. We go through that later. This would be where, hey, I got a referral from Coldwell Banker Seal Beach, and I'm Coldwell Banker Town and Country, two different brokers, but we're going to work on this together. Okay. So you would check the box. It's, hey, we've got Lance of Coldwell Banker Town and Country and Sally of Coldwell Banker Seal Beach, different brokerages. And this is rare, but it certainly can be done. Okay. So that's the end of the listing agreement. I do want to buzz through. Well, actually, maybe I don't. Hold on a second. I wanted to get through. We get the seller's advisory. And then we've got okay, I'll tell you, I don't want to rush through these. So in effect, next week, what we will do is we will start off with the seller advisory form, followed by the consumer protection form. It won't take very long to get through these. One thing you guys will notice as we start going deeper, kind of like we ran into it today, is we spent a lot of time and then all of a sudden we just blew past all the agency stuff. There's a lot of repetition in these forms once we get into them. So next week we'll pick up with the SA. We'll get through the consumer CCPA. And then where I wanted to start next week is on the RPA. I don't have a slide up here, but we will start with the RPA package. So next week, we're going to go through the offer side. So the setup, the way I've got it is listing stuff first, then we're going to do the RPA next. That'll probably take 3 sessions. Okay. Once we get through that, again, a lot of repetitive, and then we'll start getting all the disclosures and all the little minutia and stuff. Okay. Last but not least, I want you guys to take the survey for this. There's a link all over the place. If you don't have the link, I think we have a copy of the survey link for this, either on this presentation, if you have it, or it's on the link tree. So I'm going to take a deep breath. Any final questions? Otherwise, thanks for sticking around. I don't think we lost one person in an hour and a half. That's always a sign that we're doing something right. Either that or you guys don't have anything better to do with your day. Andy, you're talking, but I don't see you unmuted. Or maybe you're not talking. Javier, you were unmuted. Did you have something?
I really like this course, Lance. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I still have a couple of tweaks that I want to make. And if some of you guys did come in a little bit late, so let me end with this. So I'm going to tweak the presentation. I'm pretty happy with it. Thank you, Javier. But I do want to make a couple other changes. If you did come in late at the very beginning of the session, we've been talking about the CBTC portal that we're creating. These sessions will be recorded and they will be posted here. So if you wanted to go back and see last week, or if you want to see what we did today, today's class probably won't be posted until tomorrow or maybe Monday, but you can come to the portal. For now, we have it under curated training. I don't think it's easy to find. I'm going to change that. And now you have to scroll here down to contracts. Now, again, not easy to find. I'm going to change that. I want to make this much more user-friendly on where we find these. But if you come over here to the contract and disclosures, you'll click here. It will take you to the recorded version. This was last week's version. The entire thing is here. If you keep scrolling down, this is the printed material. So my goal is to get all of these done live, posted on Facebook, and then also bring the content back over here onto the portal so you guys can come here and see it anytime. And it's not exactly what I want, but it's getting closer. So we'll make improvements as we go. Okay, I'm gonna stop my screen share. I don't see anybody else unmuted. I'll take another question if you got it. Otherwise, let's go sell something. Okay, nobody's unmuted. Oh, I got something in chat. Oh, you're welcome. Amelia, you're welcome. Have a great day, guys. Have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.